Good morning, world. Welcome again to ISOJ 2021. It is a pleasure to start the third day of our global conference. We have almost 7,000 people registered from 130 countries. So this is very, very, very exciting for all of us who have been putting together this great conference. We want to thank you, Google News Initiative and Knight Foundation for their support. We also thank Univision for their support for us to have simultaneous interpretation into Spanish. So you can watch this live on YouTube and Zoom. And don't forget to use the hashtag ISOJ 2021 on Twitter, and you can drop questions on YouTube, on Zoom, on Twitter, and we're going to be passing the question to the wonderful keynote session that we are about to start. So we have here with us Anna Palmer and Jake Sherman, co-founders of Punchbowl News, directly from Washington, D.C., and we have my friend Evan Smith, the co-founder and CEO of the Texas Tribune. I have been a proud board member of Texas Tribune, and it's a great success. So it's good to see the new startup that Anna and Jake have been putting together and have launched with great success. So without further ado, let's pass it to Evan Smith.
Rosenthal, thank you so much. You're my professor always. And don't tell Trey Brundrett, but you're also my favorite board member. Hi, everybody. Welcome to ISOJ 2021, the best annual conference that is not the Texas Tribune Festival. And to this session, keynote session, with Jake Sherman and Anna Palmer, two of four co-founders of Punchbowl News. Before its launch on January 3rd of this year, Jake and Anna spent 4 years as co-authors of Politico's Playbook franchise. They've been writing partners for a decade. Their first book, the New York Times bestseller, The Hill to Die On, The Battle for Congress and the Future of Trump's America, was published in 2019. Jake covered national politics for Politico with a special focus on Congress and its leaders through the Obama and Trump presidencies. He previously reported for the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, and the Minneapolis Star Tribune. A native of Connecticut, he's a graduate of George Washington University and Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Anna, raised in North Dakota, has covered congressional leadership, the lobbying industry, presidential campaigns, and the politics of governing for more than 15 years. 9 of those years with Politico, where she was senior Washington correspondent and hosted the Women Rule podcast. She previously worked at Legal Times and Roll Call. She is a graduate of St. Olaf College. Jake, Anna, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Evan.
Yeah, great to be here.
Great to be with you. I'm going to begin with the question that I asked you, Jake, first, back when you told me that you were planning to start something new. What is the problem you're trying to solve with Punchbowl News? There's a lot of political journalism out there. There are a lot of email newsletters about the politics of the moment, arguably more than ever. And many of them are sitting unopened in my inbox as we speak. Why does the world need this?
So I'll kick it off, and thanks again for having us, and we're really happy to be here.
Sure.
The problem and Anna, jump in at any point here, but the problem we were trying to solve was that we were trying to take an even more specific and more intense take and lens on the politics of governing specifically, and the leaders of Washington, both on Capitol Hill and in the White House. We are not looking to be a something for everybody. That's not what we are, what our goal is. And we kind of, just as, and you kind of hit on our background a little bit, but Anna, myself, and John Bresnahan are one of our other co-founders who's sitting right behind me at the moment. We've been covering leadership and the politics of governing together for a long time. And we think we understand how those wheels turn better than anybody else, and how basically, I mean, at its core, how an idea or a bill becomes law, or how power is exercised. And we thought that we had a unique view into both how to explain that to people, the reporting that it takes to really understand it and understand what's coming around the corner, and frankly, what those people wanted to read and wanted to understand from within the community. And I'll let Anna talk about this a little bit, but we were also seeking to create conversation around content. Anna, why don't you talk a little bit about that dynamic?
Please, Anna, jump in. What are you trying to solve for here?
Yeah, so I think to your point, Evan, I think the question that I asked myself was, is anybody looking for another newsletter to start their day? Right. And I think we try to provide basically context for anybody who touches government, or whose business is government, or for the people who are actually in government. And so I think what we're solving for truly is, one, best-in-class content around the kind of North Star, which is power, people, politics, but then the concentric circles that are kind of going beyond that. I think we also had an opportunity, we launched in the middle of a pandemic, to really think about community in a very different way than most traditional news organizations have thought about it. The construct of, you write a story, you push it out, people might read it, they might not read it, but there's not really a feedback loop. And we are really interested in that feedback loop. Largely, our readers are our sources, sometimes they are our sponsors, and creating that conversation, whether that is through, you know, we also have a premium membership where we have kind of private Zooms. We are going to start to do in-person small events, but really thinking of ourselves as a convening power that I think is missing in Washington right now.
Yeah, I want to get into a lot of what you just said over the course of the hour, which is terrific. I will say, with that regard to that idea that there are a lot of emails that are unopened in all of our inboxes. For the record, I always open your emails, and I try to listen to your podcast most mornings. Brand matters. You two showed up on day one with a recognizable brand, and surely you had to have been banking on that, your known quantities. This was not really a build from an empty lot startup, Jake, right?
No, it was not. I think that our reporting, and all three of us, me, Anna, and Brez, all of our reporting speaks for itself over the last 2 decades, and that was certainly helpful. Obviously, right, is that we were able to come in and we weren't trying to build sources from scratch or say trust us from scratch. We had this brand, and we launched, by the way, January 3rd, and we left Politico on December 31st, and we all felt eventually, after a lot of conversations, that we didn't want there to be a drop off. We wanted to be a constant presence, because we felt that was important for the community and the audience that we hoped to cultivate, and that we eventually did cultivate.
And I would just add on to that. I think there's a real intimacy when you write in a morning product that people really, roll over and read every day. They feel like they know you. I was one of the biggest, I think, things that surprised me when we got into the business of the morning newsletter. I have written different iterations of newsletters at Politico for a long time, but particularly when they kind of get up with you, there's an intimacy where they feel like they know you as people. You listen to our morning podcast. It's the first thing most people do when they're making their coffee. And so part of that is consistency. And I think part of that is trust that you gain with the readership for 4.5 years. And we took that the next day and said, hey, we're still here. And actually what we're going to do is create a product that is even more us, because we started from scratch. You have to remember, we took over a product that was 10 years old, that had a lot of constraints that were already built into it. This is, I think, much more emblematic of our kind of actual reporting style. We do a lot more kind of explaining, not trying to make people feel stupid, but not a lot of people know necessarily how, kind of different policy things happen, like reconciliation. And so trying to give people a little bit of the cliff notes to do their job and to manage up, I think, has also been really successful here.
Right. Anna, so let me ask the same question I asked Jake to you, but in another way. I want you to define the need for this in the negative. What's wrong with the many options already available to us? What was missing, or what is missing in your mind as you look at the landscape?
Yeah, I think if you look at a lot of the Washington journalism that has started around different administrations, right? If you look at Politico, it started at the beginning of the Obama administration. It was solving for a new presidency, a new kind of demand in terms of speed in content. You look at Axios, that was started at the start of the Donald Trump era, right? This was the new kind of politics as entertainment era. We felt like the Biden administration was going to be solving for what we are solving for is this is the business of legislating. We are having a return here where after 4+ years of kind of not really legislating, not having business in order or Congress, frankly, matter, all of a sudden the people, the four corners in leadership and their relationships with each other, their relationships with the White House, their relationships with industry, that is actually going to be the most interesting story of the Biden administration and whether or not things get done or they don't get done.
Jake, let's be gracious to your previous employer and say that you both had an opportunity, you and Anna, and Brez too, to learn a lot at Politico. And specifically, you and Anna learned a lot doing Playbook. What did you learn there that rolls forward into this? What about the Playbook experience informed and defined your thinking about Punchbowl?
A lot. And I would even go back even further. I mean, we came to... Anna and I both really joined Politico when it was, and Brez certainly, when it was a startup, right? I mean, there were like 50 people total who were at Politico when I joined in 2009. So that kind of dynamic, that vibe of starting something from the ground up helped us think about, when me, Anna, and Brez were talking at the beginning of creating this company, we said, what is the news product we would design if we were designing a news product from scratch, which we were in essence. So, I would say accountability to the audience. I think that when people read a newsletter in the morning and you're trying to be authoritative, you better have a really good sense of what you're saying. You better either be there or be talking to the right, physically, literally be there, or just be talking to the right people. So when you say something, you're saying it with a lot of knowledge and know-how, that you're not just out there making proclamations from your living room, that doesn't work. Your audience is going to lose trust with you. If you say something is going to happen, you better be right. If you make, if that's your analysis, you better be right. And I'd say that is something we learned probably the hard way a little bit at Politico, doing Playbook at the beginning, but we definitely got authoritative, by fire, I guess is the best way to say it. And I'm in the Capitol right now. This is where I work every day. This is where I come to work. I'm in the hallways. I just got back from Orlando, where I was at the House Republican policy retreat. So like I really tried to do everything I can to be in the middle of all the big discussions, all the big policy discussions, political discussions, because I tried to inform my reporting with reporting. That's kind of, I think, the best lesson I think we learned.
And as you correctly say, it's an instant feedback loop, because you're walking among the people you're both writing about and who are your readers, and you're going to hear from them one way or the other, or every way, right? If you don't get it right. Jake, you're going to hate this question, but I don't care. If the goal of Politico once upon a time was to win the day, the goal of Punchbowl News is blank. Fill in the blank.
To be the most authoritative. I'm not going to put it in those terms, but we want to be the authoritative source on power, people, and politics in Washington. Right. I think that's where we are. We want to understand. The center of our universe is Nancy Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, Steny Hoyer, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, Liz Cheney, Ron Klain. The representatives of the big companies who are spending millions of dollars to influence policy, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell. That is the center of our universe. And we're not looking to, that's who our North Star is. Anna, who am I forgetting there?
No, I think that's right. I think it's being indispensable to our audience. I really do think that we are able to connect dots and also forecast for people what's happening in the Capitol and at the White House in a way that just general assignment news organizations don't do. They almost cover the Capitol like it's a foreign bureau, right? They have a couple of folks that are there. They're covering the big stories of the day, themes. We are going a lot deeper. We also know these people. They know us. To your point, Evan, like I think there is a ton of accountability where you can't just sound off, at a White House press briefing if you're us, because you're gonna have to go to Nancy Pelosi's people the next day and the day after that, and you get that kind of constant feedback. Not that we don't pull punches or we aren't hard, because I think people would have a great track record of that. But I do think there is a different sense of intimacy too in terms of what our reporting actually showcases.
And I think you just made an interesting point that hadn't occurred to me. It's not just that you're telling people what happened, but you're looking ahead 2 or 3 moves on the game board very often, right? And you have to be confident enough in your ability to predict. We all get into trouble predicting, but you have to at least be aware enough of what's happening to be able to say what is likely to happen next is ABC. And that's obviously something valuable. I want to ask you about competition. Anna, Politico is obviously in your competitive set. So is Axios. Both those names have come up a couple times right now, but you view the competitive set as wider than that. Who's in it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that people love to define us. We're 4 months old. And so I think it's easy to say, oh, they're just a Capitol Hill publication, or they're just going to be on a very small subset because, everyone's looking around at this new journalistic order. I think we're in competition with you potentially if there's a story about the Texas leadership. We're in competition with the 19th. We're in competition with the Times. I mean, I think our North Star is what's happening. If we miss a story under the dome or what's happening in the White House, like we are kicking ourselves. And that doesn't mean that like we might be going up against hundreds of reporters at other news organizations. But I don't view us just as in competition with other newsletters. I don't just view us in competition with, kind of the traditional newspapers. I think that like the entire paradigm shift of journalism with Twitter and everything else, you have to kind of look through the broader lens.
Well, here I can confirm what you just said, because when my great colleague and friend Abby Livingston, who's the Washington bureau chief of the Tribune, broke the news last week or the week before that Kevin Brady, the House Ways and Means chairman, was going to step down, you very kindly credited her with that scoop in Punchbowl. And I thought to myself, they're probably kicking themselves that they didn't have that first, but it was an acknowledgement, at least, that your competitive set extends beyond the Capitol or Washington. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have your share of scoops. We're lucky to sneak one in when you're not looking, right?
Oh,
but
no.
But you get it. Abby is the absolute greatest. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, of course, we would have loved to have that scoop, but we're not going to pretend that there's things that we sometimes miss. That's human nature.
Do you all think that the people who you consider to be competition consider you to be competition? Do you think the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, for instance, are thinking to themselves, we got to read Punchbowl, we got to get out ahead of those guys because we're worried that now there's more people in the water capable of breaking news beyond us?
I think they see us as competitive because they have to quote us a lot.
Right. Well, that's true. Right.
I think they're paying attention. At least that they're paying attention when most of those organizations, all of them, I think that you mentioned, have had to say, and Punchbowl News reported.
Right. I would also say, Evan, I hope I love to be underestimated. To be honest with you, I live to be underestimated. I mean, Brez always tells us, all the time, like, you're only as good as the last thing you wrote, and you have to prove yourself every single day, and you have to. But it's also in a strange way. I mean, it's not as if we're Tesla and we're going up against GM and we're trying to prove a new technology, right? I mean, we're trying to, we've used these parts before to extend the metaphor a little bit. So it's not as if let's see if Jake and Anna and Brez can report in this context. Yeah. Reporting is reporting, right? So that's helpful.
Well, and the other part of this that's undeniably true is that the mountain is coming to you in this sense, right? The other big news organizations are becoming a little bit more nimble and a little bit more like a Punchbowl News in terms of how they think about the work they do. Everybody is kind of coming to a different place at this point, right? I want to ask you to talk about, in the broadest terms, what this thing is, because we've talked around it for the last couple of minutes, but there are people in the uninitiated here. So it's newsletters, it's the Daily Punch podcast, it's on-camera interviews. Anna ticked off a bunch of the things that you mentioned earlier. Talk about what's free and what's not. So the morning newsletter is free. The midday and late afternoon editions are paid, right? There's also premium content. An example would be something that you just wrote about this morning, the Canvas, which is an anonymous survey of senior staff on Capitol Hill. Non-members will get the top lines. Members will get full results and analysis. So Anna, the model here is a mix of paid and free. You think that's the right way to go?
I do. I mean, I've just spent a lot of time thinking about this, as I'm sure you have. We all have. What's the future of journalism? I think that there's often a real false conflict between profit and being able to be a good journalist and to be able to put together out a product that is of the highest standard. And so for us, you know, in Washington right now, there's a huge frothiness in the market in terms of paid advertising because things are going to happen or they might happen. And so every company wants to influence what happens in terms of that. So we do our newsletters. We have, you know, our advertisers that advertise for the week at that level. And then we have the premium community, which is to me the real heart of what we want to grow, which is our membership, our community, this constant conversation that we're talking about. Right. Which is the other 2 newsletters that it will definitely be, you know, kind of exclusive journalism or information that they're going to be available, but also smaller events, different things like that. And then we also do events, as you said, which are, I think, kind of in that whole feedback loop, right? They're sponsored, but they also are huge newsmaker events. So they kind of feed the journalism. And we also have a couple of other products. We started one called The Opener, that was a sponsored kind of every other week cadence product. You'll see us do things like that aren't necessarily building a whole new arm that's going to be there forever, but that are of the moment that can fill a void and kind of tell the story that we want to tell.
But Anna, you know, though, we'll talk about the economics of this, I hope, in a little bit of detail in a little bit. But you know that generally speaking, there is a debate, as you correctly say, between do you make it paid or do you make it free and then find somebody else to pay you for the ability to make it free? I tend to be, as a nonprofit news site CEO, of the mind that you can't accomplish a public service mission behind a paywall, right? The content wants to be free. You made a conscious decision to launch this as a for-profit venture. Correct. So you don't have the same motivation necessarily, say, that I might or that others might to make your content free for everybody.
Could I make a point here that I actually read this someplace else that I think is really, and I don't know where I've read it. I think it might be Jessica Lesson who said this, but I don't want to falsely. I'm actually relatively sure it is, but I'm sure I'll hear from her if it wasn't. She made a really good point. Just because something is behind a paywall does not mean that it doesn't influence the public debate. It doesn't mean that it doesn't provide a public service. It doesn't mean that it doesn't inform the larger kind of political debate. I think that I personally think, and I think, you know, I respect the hell out of what you guys do, and I love your stuff, and we link to it all the time. But you know, I think that remains true when it's behind a paywall, and I think that. So anyway, that's my
Jake. The reality is that most news sites are behind some form of a paywall, whether it's metered or a full-on paywall. And I don't see the Wall Street Journal having less influence because you have to pay to get access to their content, right?
Or the Financial Times.
There's plenty of, or the Dallas Morning News. I mean, there's plenty of places actually. And let me come back to you and say, you know, that the mix of things we just talked about, newsletters and events and, you know, podcasts. To be fair, that's not markedly different from what other news organizations provide. Here is a big difference, is the presentation and distribution of your journalism. You do not have a conventional destination website.
By design.
I'm sure it is by design. So explain the thinking behind that.
Yeah, so particularly on the business side of things, I think it's a really hard thing to chase numbers, which is basically what a lot of news websites do when you have banner ads and different things like that. For us, we aren't trying to grow the next New York Times or Wall Street Journal, you know, to become a 500-person global newsroom. That is not our mission, at least is how we see it now. In 10 years, could that be different? Maybe, like, you know, things change. But how we see this is we want to be nimble. We want to drive everything to our newsletters. And that basically the homepage, punchbowl.news. If you don't subscribe, you should get that in while we can, is to go subscribe to our free newsletter, right? And which goes out to a very, very large audience. And, you know, if you like that content, you feel like you want more of it, then you can become a premium member. We know that we have a very captive audience of premium members, whether it's companies, whether it's whole offices on Capitol Hill that subscribe, that are, you know, need this information every single day. They want this information every day. And so to me, the reason why we did it this way is just to go back to what you were saying is this is, I think, a much more sustainable business model in terms of, for example, the pandemic. A lot of news organizations maybe struggle to find some of their companies advertising like they once did, right? This is something where you build a real loyalty of people, and we try to price it in a way that it's $300 a year, that it's not necessary. Yes, it's expensive and we understand that, but it's not $10,000 a year. It is, you know, available.
And by the way, there were plenty of people who you and we all know, who suggested we should be far more expensive than that. And
Right.
we talked to a lot of people about what would you charge if you were doing this concept that we were thinking about. People said $2,000 a year.
Well, there are people paying money for newsletters now. We all know them. That are in the thousands, and so it's Brez, a relatively small amount of money.
Who I'm bringing into the conversation transitively. He worked for one of his first jobs in DC was for Inside Washington, which was a big newsletter publisher before newsletters were a thing, right? And that was very expensive and had nearly 100% return rate. I think it was thousands of dollars. So that. Yeah. We all think that this is where a huge chunk of the business is going.
Right. But again, the fact is, even the New York Times will tell you that if they could swap out reader revenue for advertising revenue, and in fact, they're doing it, or they're not, advertising revenue is still important for them, but they talk all the time about how they've been able to kind of pivot that. And now reader revenue consumer revenue is more of a significant component of their overall year. I mean, you're following in a proud tradition in the modern realm of journalism to try to get more money from people and users rather than sponsors or advertisers. But again, this idea that I never have to come to your website. Here's an example. The last time I've been to your website before preparing for this interview was when I signed up to be a premium member, right? So, I'm not used to having an interaction with the news organization that way. I get everything in the morning. It's the first thing I read in the morning, and so I don't ever go to your website.
Yeah,
but we think.
I feel like my point is, I think we want to meet readers where they are. Right now, it's on email. I think we will and are thinking about what the future looks like. I also think we stood up a news organization in a very, very, very short amount of time. So I would expect that you'll see some developments, particularly for premium members, that will go through. But to your point, I don't expect us to ever have a main page that is stories and a mix of things like that. I just don't think that's what we're trying to create.
It's not what you've built. Yeah. Jake, so you've danced around what I'm about to say. It's my characterization, not yours, but I think you'd agree. What you're selling to people effectively with this is insider access, special knowledge. You have relationships and are leveraging those relationships developed over many years, pre-Punchbowl, right? To ultimately allow you to get the stories that you're presenting to us, scoops and non-scoops. You're also in a fairly narrow lane in that you know what you are and you know what you're not. Your former colleague, Jim Vandehei, said to Ben Smith when you launched that he thought Punchbowl News would be the most successful independent newsletter created in 2021 if they stay small and minimalist and if they focus tightly on Capitol Hill. Now, we know that it was sort of a little bit of a shot across the bow, but also because Vandehei can't help it. But he also had a point, which is that narrowness of what your focus was a strength. It was a feature and not a bug, correct?
Yeah. So Jim has a way with words, as we all know.
He does.
I would say this. I would say it's less access because I'm not selling access. What I'm selling is reporting.
How are you not, Jake, I love you, but how are you not selling access? You can get Kevin McCarthy, you can get Mitch McConnell to talk to you in a way that a lot of other people can't. You have access. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but it is a thing.
I just want to make clear that we're not selling access to our subscribers, meaning they can't get access to Mitch McConnell through me. That's not what.
But you have access to people that not every reporter has because of relationships built over time. That's true.
That is true. That is true that we have. That I have good sources. Brez has good sources. Anna has good sources, and we report and monetize that, and we monetize our reporting. But I would say this. I would say that the reason that's the opening salvo. I think the reason that people continue to talk to you is that A, you're fair, and B, that that they know that your audience is worth talking to. I mean, people don't like the New York Times because they think they have a beautiful layout and they talk to because sometimes we call it here the donor paper, right? Democrats talk to the New York Times because it's the donor paper. Republicans talk to the Wall Street Journal, submit op-eds to the Wall Street Journal because that's the Republican donor paper. So what we're saying is not markedly different from that, is that and Anna could talk more about this, but we're not saying that this is going to be the only thing we ever cover. We are saying,
for now, you've given yourself that limit, right?
Yes, and I think, to be honest with you, Evan, I think without talking about other news organizations, we feel like in this business, you need to know what you are and be so certain about what you are and who your audience is.
Yeah.
Because I see people doing things all the time that makes no sense to their audience. And I just think that people need to read you in the morning or whenever, for us, 3 times a day. And you need to know that what you're telling your audience is something that's going to move political markets, not Wall Street markets, but we just think of the political space as a political market, and it's going to make a dispositive difference in informing the political markets and breaking news and providing fresh analysis and accountability to the people in power.
Anna, I want to be very clear. I actually think that a narrow lane is the best lane to be in. In fact, we've been for 12 years in a lane in which we knew exactly what our stories are and what they're not, Right. I mean, when you come in the office every morning, you don't have to ask yourself, is this something we should be doing? You know it. And you've done the same thing. Here's my question for you. Unlike some of your competitors, is it true that you have no plans to expand into some or all of the 50 state capitals? Asking for a friend.
I'm a lot less interested in physical, where people are. I think the pandemic has really opened us up. We don't have, for example, office space, right? I mean, we're 4 people. A lot of us work out of the Capitol. Yeah. Rachel doesn't even live in DC. So, I think we have an opportunity to think about things a little bit differently, but I think that we are very interested in how power is exercised. I think that the kind of the state power to Congress, and especially as you think about where there's some really active legislatures, I think that that's very interesting. I think at this point, we are wanting to fortify what we're doing and making sure that our truest, most important mission is served.
I would say the way I think about it, Evan, is, and I say this all the time, it's like you have a wet towel and you wring all the water out of that one towel that you can, in the sense that I'm much more interested, I meaning Punchbowl, Anna, me, Brez, and Rachel, our other co-founder, we're really interested in going deep in the area in which we're in. And not like, we're not going to become maybe we will at some point, but we have no plans to become a sports media outlet covering the Yankees. Although Brez would take that job.
That's why
Brez and I have spent most of the year complaining about how the Yankees have played. I don't think you want to get in that business now.
Yeah, I know.
But I just want to say, I do think that's why you see us do the Canvas is a really great example of where we will expand, which is basically trying to find areas where we think we can provide an absolute value add to everyone, and no one's in that space. Like, no one has a credible survey of senior members of staff on the Hill that are so important to what actually gets done in this building.
Jake, let me ask you about a criticism of the form and specifically of you all, because you get criticized, we get criticized, we all get criticized. You get crap in some predictable venues for giving a platform to people considered to be unworthy or objectionable. I'm thinking back, honestly, to when I interviewed a couple of weeks ago, George W. Bush for South by Southwest. RIP my mentions. All of a sudden, I was a war criminal for daring to give a platform to the former president, right? Well, you get a version of that. Here is a tweet from today, Jake, responding to one of your tweets promoting this conversation. Will you be addressing how you whitewash and normalize the Republicans' ongoing efforts to overthrow democracy? You hear this all the time. By talking to Kevin McCarthy, you become a problem because you're daring to give the House Minority Leader an audience, access to an audience. I mean, so what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous that we don't. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. Number one, we've asked people, Republicans, a million times. We were here January 6th.
You were in the building. You were literally in the building.
Correct. Brez and I were sitting right where we're sitting right now. Right. I think we've asked them these questions a million times. Yeah. I didn't will Kevin McCarthy to be minority leader. I can't make him disappear from the earth if that's what people are suggesting. I need to cover him because he's the House Minority Leader.
You don't make the news, you cover the news. That's
correct. And we said this to Ben for the piece for the New York Times at the beginning. It's our job to explain to people, their politicians and public officials' motivations, why they do what they do, and to hold them accountable for what they do, which we've done. I mean, listen, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is right now raising millions of dollars off of all sorts of things. I mean, we broke, it might have been 2 weeks ago, this America First Caucus idea. So the idea that like we're not willing to report tough stuff about, I mean, we've gotten people indicted. We've gotten people kicked out of Congress. We've written stories about misspending of government resources, of campaign resources.
And it's both Republicans and Democrats. I think the other thing I just want to add to this is I actually think one of the tenets that when we were sitting around talking about how we were going to do this is that we weren't just going to report on every tweet that was going crazy, that of things that aren't consequential. Our North Star is, does it matter in terms of how it's impacting leadership, how leadership is going to lead, bills getting passed. And that's how we try to weigh whether or not we cover someone or something.
Right.
And let me just say one more thing, Evan. Let me just say one more thing on this topic. We don't take our cues. No one is calling us and telling us what to cover. But our readership is intensely interested in the politics of governing. They are interested in what's coming around the pike. They are interested in how members are thinking about taxes, spending, national security. These are the things that they are interested in. So as a business, we are going to write about things that we believe are in the public interest and that people are interested in. And if we start writing about things that people are not interested in, then that becomes a difficult proposition. And guess what? For all the critics out there, this is a business.
Yeah, the business will drop off if you don't write about stuff people want to read. And let's also stipulate.
I'm not asking people what they want us to cover, but like we need to. We cover the news, and we hold public officials accountable. We do both of those things.
Let's stipulate, and you mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene. Remember that after you broke that story a couple of weeks ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted that Punchbowl News is a borderline tabloid, right? Everybody's a critic. At least, Jake, she didn't mention your Jewish lasers. So that's,
No, she did, and not mine, but she said that she deleted this tweet, I believe. She said that we took Anglo-Saxon out of context. It was impossible to take it out of context because we literally printed the entire document.
No, I mean, it was in the document.
It was in context.
But I don't know. Anna, you're the CEO, and so my sister, CEO to CEO of a digital media startup. Yeah. I don't know if anybody told you this, but it kind of sucks to be the CEO these days. But
that's why Anna has the job.
I understand. Would you help me think about the staffing of this organization? I've tried to figure out how you've managed to do so much with so few. There are 4 co-founders. There also appear to be only 4 staffers. Maybe you tell me about staffers I'm not aware of. How many people are working for you right now?
Yeah, so that we're just 4 people. We did just we are going to do some hiring for some full-time folks on the editorial side, as well as probably one on the business operations side. We use a lot of freelancers and a lot of our web developers and things like that. Right. But I think we wanted to be lean. One, we raised a very little amount of money for this purposely. We wanted to own the vast majority of it and kind of be leaders and owners of the company. And so we didn't know what the reception was going to be, frankly. You start something, you have a theory of the case. I think we felt confident in that theory, but we didn't necessarily know because there was such a short amount of runway between leaving on the 31st, starting on the 3rd. But that's how so it's basically Jake and Brez are 100% editorial. I kind of straddled between the business and the editorial, I'm sure as you do.
Right. You are writing though, right? I mean, I was trying to figure this out, right? You are writing to some degree. You aren't out of the business of doing journalism beyond the podcast. Right?
I'm not. I'm still writing.
But Brez and Jake are doing. Okay, I get that.
I'd say I'm 99% editorial, and Anna tells me about business decisions that she's making, and Anna is spending most of her time on business, whereas, and I'm only comparing most of her time, meaning when we were doing Playbook, we were both 100% editorial for the most part.
But you're also both doing a fair amount of representing the brand out in the world, because I see, Jake, you on television all the time. Anna, I see you increasingly on television all the time. That's in the new universe of these kinds of things. That is a requirement, a necessary component of building and running your business. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did that a lot for the last 4.5 years. I certainly did. I mean, I felt like I was going around the world kind of as an ambassador. And I think particularly as you start a new brand, you need to evangelize.
Always. So Anna, I want to hit you up for information about the economics of this. I paid my $300 for the year. I was one of your early people to buy in. I'm getting my money's worth. Full disclosure, I like it. How many me's are there? How many paid members do you have?
Jake and I were just talking about what we were going to talk about. So we are a private company. We have not disclosed a lot of our information. I mean, we're 4 months old.
An answer that you would not let other people get away with, by the way.
More than $1 million subscription business.
More than $1 million of subscription business.
Mm-hmm. And that will, I think, grow substantially.
Yeah.
And that's pretty, Evan, that's pretty, and I would say, and we didn't discuss this part, but we've said this publicly. I mean, that's pretty just grassroots people signing up type stuff. You know, like we've not, like we see big opportunities at, you know, the Texas Tribune Festival, for example, or South by Southwest, at being out there and kind of building our business, which we did at Playbook, by the way, right? I mean, you saw us do that at your festival and other places. We haven't been able to do that. So we hope to be able to do things like that. And we think that will substantially grow the business. But yeah, we're pretty.
That and corporate memberships and other things. Yeah.
And Anna, is the universe of potential members, you've obviously done an analysis of the market. Mm-hmm. Is the universe of potential members big enough to make and sustain a business over the long term?
Yes, I am confident of it. I mean, if you look at you have to think, like, look at the other, I mean, they aren't us, but look at Congressional Quarterly, look at Politico Pro, look at, you know, I mean, all of these, I mean, the kind of the addressable marketplace is huge when you look at, I believe, any industry that is impacted by what happens in Washington in terms of regulation should know Punchbowl News and should subscribe to us.
Right, but at $300 a pop, this is where the affordability of it doesn't necessarily benefit you, right? It's easier to run a business with 20,000 subscribers into the thousands a year than it is in 300 a year, right?
Yeah, I think we also have we do enterprise pricing and other things for corporate memberships.
Well, and then of course you have sponsors or advertisers. I guess you think of them as advertisers because you're a for-profit business. We refer to them as the artists formerly known as advertisers, right? Where they're sponsors. But in any case, you have a certain amount of corporate money coming in. You want to tell me what you're doing on that side of it? Give me a ballpark on how you've done so far on corporate.
I do not, but I will say we have.
Neither do I guess.
You know, until we're ready to talk about it, I don't think we're going to talk about it in terms of the numbers. I will say we have Amazon, Facebook, National Retail Federation, Walmart. We have very large partners that have done that buy the weekly newsletter and then do
the podcast. I listened to the podcast, the last episode that I listened to, Facebook at the very beginning, followed by Dell Technologies. This is not Joe's Sandwich Shop. These are actually people with money, right? Yep. Theoretically. Okay, so you mentioned earlier the idea of launching during the pandemic, Anna. What a weird time to start something new. Right, during a pandemic, during an economic downturn, and as it turns out, 3 days before the very near end of our democracy, not to put too fine a point on it. What a time to launch. How challenging has that been for you?
I think, you know, I look back on it, it's all a little bit of a blur. Jake and I have been talking about going out on our own or doing something more entrepreneurial for a long time. So much of being a reporter is being entrepreneurial, right? Getting sources, doing stories. I think for running basically 2 platforms at Politico, because I ran that. I also ran our Women Rule platform. You know, at Politico, we doubled revenue, tripled subscribers for Playbook over 4.5 years. So I think we had a really good track record of understanding what was going to happen. Right. I think starting a new business in the pandemic, like we didn't even meet. We raised a very small amount of money, but we've not even met one of our investors that led the round in person.
You mean in person?
Yeah, in person. I mean, that's crazy when you think about it.
We REA Borkoff at Liontree, who is, you know, does a million zillion media deals that are far bigger than us, you know, led the round and raised the money. And we still, you know, we talked to him basically only over Zoom and on the phone, obviously, but we've not been to New York to where he lives to meet with him. And it's pretty that's pretty wild when you think about that. When you think about all these stories about, you know, road shows to raise money for companies, we're not that complex of a company.
Well, and the reality is on the nonprofit side, a lot of us are raising money over Zoom or email the same. I mean, it's just been a strange year. All right, so we have a couple minutes before I want to go to audience questions, which I'm assuming I'll take a look that we have. I want to ask you about some political stuff as it relates to the launch of the business. So you launched in a pandemic and an economic downturn, you launched right before an insurrection, but you also launched at the start of a new administration. But you didn't know that when you announced you were leaving Politico, right? You didn't know who was going to win the election. You might have thought, but it was October. I went back and looked. It was October that the news broke.
Yeah.
Right. So whoever won on November 3rd, you were out of there. How would this be different if we were at the start of a second Trump term?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, listen, we had pretty There was a different kind of journalism, a different storyline in the Trump administration, in that, they oftentimes made proclamations about legislation that were just complete nonsense. And you had to be able to say, like, no, that's not going to happen based on, here's the data that we have about Congress that tells us that this isn't going to happen. Now, here's what might happen if X and Y happen. But so it was a lot of that, and a lot of that when it came to covering kind of the nexus of the White House and the administration. I think that's the main difference. I mean, listen, the situation we have for what we're trying to create, or what we have created, a 5-seat majority or 4-seat majority in the House and a 50-50 Senate. I mean, that is the ball game for us. I mean,
divided
and that
government,
is
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that helps us. That makes what we're doing, I think, even more. But the great thing is, Evan, the great thing is that legislating is never going anywhere. You always there are people who are always interested in governing, and always
whoever the president is.
Exactly. So we felt like it's an evergreen story, and we were well positioned to do it.
Anna, but the reality is that, as much as Jake is exactly right, that you're focused on Congress, Congress is always going to Congress, right? Congress got a Congress. A Biden presidency and a Trump presidency are different from the standpoint of how you think about journalism. I mean, for a long time, there were no White House press briefings. Now you can't turn on a television without seeing Jen Psaki, right? How leaky is this White House? Or maybe I should ask, how disciplined is this White House? What's the difference between having Trump as the central character in the narrative versus Biden, in your mind?
I think it's, a totally different scenario, right? The Trump White House, extremely leaky, a lot of backfighting and people trying to, leak stuff all the time. I think that the Biden White House is extremely, so far they've had a lot of success. So I think Ron Klain and company have it pretty locked down. I think there's a lot of White House reporters who find it, it's a lot more boring than the Donald Trump era, because it's kind of like, they have a plan, they roll it out, they do all the press briefings, the company, statements come out. To us, I think it's also more interesting. I will say that's more interesting to me anyway. I don't want to speak for Jake, but I think you'd agree with me, Jake, is there's a lot more interaction and interplay between this White House and Congress. So that, for people that are covering that, it's very interesting. Whereas, Donald Trump, particularly over the last year or so, he didn't ever really care about Congress, and he didn't care to get to know much more about it. And so,
but I would say there's much more substantive. There's much more substantive interplay. Like, not just like Mark Meadows coming up to the Hill and, slapping some backs, but like, talking about policy, Ron Klain, Steve Ricchetti, these people talking about policy. And here's what I also would say, like, the people in this White House understand policy in a way. And and as Anna indicated, they have a plan to achieve what their goal is, where in the Trump administration, they didn't really have that.
Got it. All right, I want to go to audience questions. We actually, fortunately, and not surprisingly, have a good number, and you got 13 minutes. You can't run the clock out. We're going to ask you some good ones here. I'll mention the questioner and then ask the question and give you guys a shot at answering it, and one or both of you jump in on this. From James Ian Tennant, Anna mentioned something to the effect that your readers are your sources and your sponsors. Can you expand on that in the sense of whether Punchbowl can become too cozy with its sources of revenue? This is connected to Evan's point about selling access. The reality is you've heard the whole, you're part of the problem line, not just you, but a lot of organizations like yours, in that you're too cozy with the people who you report on, and that access becomes an impediment to you doing the kind of journalism you have to do. What do you say about that?
Yeah, it's not a new criticism, right? I think it's been kind of as the old of time. And DC is a company town, right? Like, I no matter what, whether you're going to, baseball practice for your kid, or most people, even if they own a restaurant, they do have fundraisers there. They touch parts of politics because that's really what it is. I would say, and I would put up our reporting, against anything, which is that I think we are fair, we're hard, we are very, I think that is going to always be our North Star. Because I think if we weren't accurate, then all of a sudden people wouldn't read us, right? We're not here to give press releases. I think that we don't do anything like that. So I feel comfortable in that sense. I do think there's an ecosystem. And I think by trying to say, in the same way as I think you can be a really great journalistic enterprise and also be a for-profit company, those things, are, just because they're both true, doesn't mean that the journalism suffers.
Jake, do you have any hesitation about taking the head off of somebody with whom you have a close working relationship in the Capitol, knowing that that will impede that relationship? I mean, that's the nature of journalism, right? You've got to be willing to do journalism first, last, and always.
No, I don't have any and no hesitation about that. Most the weakness in that criticism is that it assumes that part of the criticism, I'll say on the editorial, Anna answered for the business. It assumes that that sources don't understand that that you are inevitably going to whack them. Yeah. That's part of the game. I mean, that's part of.
No, they know it, right? They have to be prepared for it. If they don't know it, they're stupid. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. I mean, and I would say the game because that's just the saying. I'm not saying this is a game for anybody who's thinking that I'm trying to minimize this. I mean, I can name a million different instances where we've written very tough stories about people who were sources, who we were not close to, but people who we talked to all the time. Right. I mean, I think that if you go ask Mark Meadows, we called him the biggest liar in political history in our book, or something along those lines. He still talked to us afterwards. I mean, we've written stories about misspending of money, and I mean, I can't even name all the things. And on the business side, I don't know who's sponsoring us week to week. Anna handles that. I go into when I produce our newsletter on Monday morning, I see it for the first time. So our sponsors don't have any say over editorial, whether it's our editorial, whether it's events or our written report. And you know, I don't know what to say beyond that.
Here is a question from Dan Frumkin. Anna, what percentage of Punchbowl's revenue comes from Facebook, Google, and Amazon?
I do not know that off the top of my head. I will say, just like in almost all Washington publications, tech is spending a lot of money.
And you believe they're spending a lot of money right now because they've got so many things in play at the Capitol? Is that why?
I mean, I think all kinds of companies that are facing regulation, that's when they spend the most amount of money.
Yeah. And a question has come in just now that I want to be sure I ask. I, again, suspect I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's an important question. And that is, to what extent are you self-censoring at all? Alejandro Carranza is asking this question because of commitments to sponsors. Have you ever felt in any way like you had to pull a punch or not do something as a consequence of a sponsor commitment?
No. Never once.
No. But we also, I mean, for 4.5 years, we had a sponsored newsletter every single day. So this isn't a new challenge that I feel like I'm
not just porting it over from one place to another. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
and I don't think I don't think that there's. I mean, you are, Evan, and your organization is great, but you're in the minority of nonprofit. I mean, nonprofit news is a great thing in my estimation. Yeah. I'm not saying it's bad, but the vast majority of media, great and bad, is for profit, and so these are not new. What Anna's saying is right. These are not new. These are not new questions for anybody.
Of course, the difference, Jake. I mean, I'll stipulate that when we started, Howard Kurtz was still working at the Washington Post, and he said, "How do we know that you're not, rolling over for sponsors?" I said, "Well, how do I know that you're not rolling over for advertisers at the Post?"
Right,
and,
precisely.
And the answer was, well, the Post is a much bigger operation. We can afford to let an advertiser or a sponsor go. That's not his answer, but that's my interpretation of that side of it. Whereas those of us who've started things were in a much more perilous situation financially. It may be harder to look one of those sponsors in the face. But again, journalism first, last, and always, right? That's got to be the way.
If you lose that, then you've lost the game. What's the point?
Yeah. Here's a question from Mark Taylor Canfield. He says, the news organizations I've worked for, Pacifica Radio Network and Democracy Watch News and others, have always organized news coverage via teleconferencing and online platforms, which eliminates the need for a physical office. So I understand that concept very well. I know that Punchbowl is focused on the newsletter, but how do you use social networking platforms to engage with readers and promote your brand? Are you essentially trying to focus on breaking stories on Twitter? Are you trying to promote stuff heavily? How are you using the social platforms to give people life here?
I would say it's evolving. I think that's probably right, Anna, the best way to say it. I mean, the way we think of it is this. So we have our 3 newsletters are kind of the core of our report right now. Right. If something's big enough that we are breaking exclusively during the day, like last night, we thought we were going to have a scoop about someone retiring. It turned out that this person was not retiring. So at 8 o'clock, I said to Anna and Brez, or Brez and I said to Anna, like, we might have to go on this tonight, and we would have put something out last night. If it's something, but if it's something small, we might tweet it. And we might expand on it and give it more context in one of our newsletters. Luckily, we have a newsletter that comes out at 6. We have one that comes out at 2, and we have one that comes out at
And honestly,
5.
you also have the ability, the means of production, to produce extra versions of the newsletter, as you
Many
did a
as we'd
lot
like.
during this week, didn't you? Did you not, from the Republican conference in Orlando?
We didn't do more, but we did more. We've done special editions.
Special editions, right?
Around some other stuff. I can't remember. Earlier in the year, around impeachment. I think we did one. I think we did one around. A big budget vote or something like that, or maybe the American Rescue Plan. So anyway, those are the kinds of things we would do extra editions for. Anna, isn't that right? Anything else?
Yeah, I think we use, as far as social, I think we do Twitter. We use all of that stuff. I think as far as, I think we try to use it the way other news organizations do. We sometimes break things on Twitter, but that's not going to be our Twitter first motto.
Right.
Got it. So we've got just a couple of minutes left. I want to pivot away from audience questions. We have maybe one or two more, but I'm going to move back to a good last question, I hope, which is, where does all this go? What is the growth plan, Anna and Jake? If we were talking a year from now and things go the way you want, how will the business be different?
Anna, why don't you take that? Because I have a couple thoughts.
But I'm also talking about the journalism piece of the business, not just the business piece. So it's an opportunity for each of you to jump in.
Yeah,
Anna,
so I think on the journalism piece, a few things. I would like to, as we hire, and we've gotten so many applications that I'm very late in going through, as Anna reminded me before this event, that I would love to do longer form, not longer form in a sense of, I want to write 5,000 words on X, but I do want to do some content that we would send out to our readership that's separate from the newsletters. What that looks like, we have plenty of ideas. Brez and I and Anna also have always done a ton of investigations. We've had a ton of things come in. We just don't have the time to do it. We want to do that.
This is not Punchbowl magazine, say. Similar.
Oh, no. No, definitely not. I would also say Anna and I and Brez are in active conversations about how to cover the midterms in a smart and engaging way. And
one of the downsides of having only 4 of you, by the way, is that it's hard to cover all these races in all these places, right?
It is, but it's possible to cover, especially because fewer and fewer seats are competitive. And I would say that the in-person, and this is where the business and the editorial kind of meet, the in-person convening both in DC and at events around the country, whether it be Austin, LA, San Francisco, is going to be a big part. And I think Anna probably has a lot more thoughts on that than I do.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I think the other thing I would just say is, I think you'll see our video strategy emerge. I think you're going to see us launch in June a new product. I think we're looking at different platforms and kind of things. So I think we have a lot in the works. I think part of it is just, one, to your point, we are 4 people, so we are kind of very engaged in doing what we're doing. But I think you'll see us grow bigger, but I think smartly. I don't think that the goal is not to become some massive organization. I think it's to be very tailored and executed at an extremely high level.
Are you likely to, to the earlier question about keeping your narrow lane and your focus, you're likely to do more of what you're doing within the boundaries that you've put in front of us, rather than become a full service news organization? You are not, in fact, going to cover sports. You are not, in fact, going to cover other subjects.
I would say this, and without saying what we will or won't do, because I think that's also an evolving discussion. Yeah. I think this model is incredibly executable in a lot of different interesting areas. I think of Hollywood. I think of hedge funds. I think of all sorts of areas that I think are undercovered or covered, not in an obtuse way, but can be covered in a much more, in an engaging, lively way that Anna and I have talked about for a million years. But there are those sub niches around the country that I think are super interesting to us. Right, Anna?
I think that's right. I think to your point, Evan, though, I think you're going to see us really focus on what we're doing, grow it. I think it's going to be around power. It could be, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that it's only going to be a Washington, D.C. based.
Got it. All right, like the end of a presidential debate where a candidate gives their campaign website URL, go ahead, Anna, tell us the website URL to subscribe.
Yes, please subscribe at punchbowl.news. That's for our free newsletter. You can get hooked on the AM, and then we also have a premium subscription, which is $300 a year.
Okay. Jake, Anna, good to be with both of you. I wish everybody in the media business luck these days because we all need it. And so let me wish you all luck. And let me say, from one startup guy to a couple of other startup folks, a special good luck to that, because I know how hard it is, and especially right now.
Thanks, Evan. We can't wait. We can't wait to get back to Austin. So
I can't wait to have you get back. Let's hope the world opens up pretty soon. Very well.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, and to everybody at ISOJ 21, thank you so much for having us. I'll now turn it back over to Rosenthal, I suppose, or somebody else from ISOJ to take it from here. Thank you.
Yes, here I am. Thank you very much. This was really great. You know, I remember that when Axios was launched, actually that same year, Jim Vanderhey came to ISOJ, and I think I learned a lot in this, and I thank you very much. Best luck with Punchbowl.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Bye. So, guys, we are continuing with ISOJ 2021. We have a workshop next in half an hour. It's going to be very interesting, and it's going to be different from the rest of the activities of the ISOJ, because we're going to have two feeds, one in Spanish and one in English, separate feeds instead of the simultaneous translation that has been so kindly offered by Univision. We are going to be talking about beyond the search, how journalists can use many other features that Google, which is one of our supporters, of course, can offer to journalists, because, you know, journalists should not be using just the advanced search, but there are many other things in addition to the advanced search. Anyway, so I see you in half an hour. I will be introducing Juan Manuel Lucero, and Mallory will gonna be introducing Mary, who is going to do the workshop in English. So see you soon.